Hi, I'm Claire and this is another reading wrap-up. In this video I'm going to talk about books 39 to 43 that I have read this year, and I read these books roughly around September, but I'm trying to kind of catch up with my wrap-ups in small chunks. So I have 5 books I want to talk about in this video, and the first one is a Tor.com novella. It is All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first book in the Murder Bot Diaries series, and it is about an android that works security for a survey operation on a new planet. So it takes care of the scientists, makes sure that nothing happens to them, and also in its downtime tries to watch as many of the entertainments that it has downloaded of the network as possible. And whilst it's working, it wants to do as little kind of weird small talk with the humans as possible. Except that balance is put in jeopardy when something bad does happen to one of the scientists, and Murderbot has to figure out what's going on whilst keeping the scientists safe. I really enjoyed this story. I thought it was a really cool like origin story for this particular character, and I'm really keen to read the next few novellas in the series. I think at least 2 of them have been announced by now, so I'm definitely looking forward to those, because one of my favorite things in science fiction, one of the reasons why I love reading science fiction, is this kind of projection into the future, imagining what society at large will be like in the future. So in this particular case, not only what will it be like when we have cool robots and we can go on discovery operations on other planets because these cool robots will be able to protect us, but also what will it be like for these cool robots? What will their place in society be? Will their programming be the only thing that gives them a personality, or will they also be a person, and how will they feel about a sense of personhood? I feel like I'm not doing the greatest job explaining why I was super excited about this book, but I guess if you're into like androids and robots and future sci-fi that also has a social side to it as opposed to just like completely hard sci-fi about the science, then I would definitely recommend All Systems Red. Next up, I finally read Old Man's War by John Scalzi. This is the first book in his Old Man's War series, and this was, I think, his debut novel that kind of caught people's attention. I'd been meaning to read this for such a long time. I'm pretty sure I've read most, if not all, of John Scalzi's novels that are not in the Old Man's War universe, so I was really keen to get caught up, but this kind of kept being pushed aside in favor of reading newer stuff, and I'm really glad I finally read it because I really enjoyed this book. If you're not familiar with the premise, this is set in a world in which once people reach the age of 70, they can sign up for the military, the space military basically. They can go off to a military base off planet, and something there happens that allows them to fight in intergalactic wars even though they're 70-year-olds. And we follow John Perry, who's the main character of this book, who enrolls in the military and kind of discovers what is going on there. I really enjoyed John Perry as a protagonist. The humor that I've come to expect from reading John Scalzi's other book was definitely already there, and I thought the story was pretty engaging, even though I also found it to be fairly episodic because the main like plot of the book doesn't really kick off until quite far into the novel. But the stuff that comes earlier in the book is interesting enough and different enough that I didn't really care that there wasn't much of a story until like say 2/3 of the way through. John Perry is definitely a protagonist with a capital P, because everything seems to be happening to him, and you kind of know as you're reading, well, obviously he's the protagonist, this highly unlikely thing is gonna happen to him, and of course this guy's gonna have heard of him. But at the same time, it was a really fun sci-fi romp, and I definitely want to continue the series and kind of find out more about this universe, because there was some really interesting stuff going on here. The next thing that I read was The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the final book in her Broken Earth trilogy, and oh my goodness, did it break my feelings. This series, it packs a punch. If you haven't heard about this series yet, it starts with The Stone Sky and continues with The Obelisk Gate. Both of those books won the Hugo Award for Best Novel. They are wonderfully, wonderfully written. I don't want to say too much about what happens in the first couple of books because there are many like cool plot twists that I don't want to spoil for you, but it is set in a world that is being periodically ravaged by what is called seasons, cataclysmic events that just ruin the world and basically make it into a post-apocalyptic wasteland every couple hundreds of years or so. In this world you also have magic users called origins who can sense the earth and use their sense of the earth to manipulate the elements, and they are very much feared and discriminated against and abused. In this book we follow characters who are origins and who are having to survive during a season, and sometimes they have to hide the fact that they're magic users and sometimes it comes in handy. Again, I don't want to say too much, that might be spoilery, but my goodness, this third book was so masterful. This was such a great conclusion to the series. This really, really worked. It really, really nailed the ending. Thematically, it worked really, really well. The ending was quite bittersweet. I'm not sure quite what else I could say about this book without going into like discussing the nitty-gritty of what happens in the book, except that I fully expect the third installment to also be a finalist for the Hugo for Best Novel next year. I'm certainly going to nominate it because it was so well done in terms of like the craft of writing as well as in terms of amount of emotion that it gave me when I was reading this book and how impactful it was. If you want a really complex, intricate, beautiful fantasy story about systems of oppression and violence and abuse and how these systems can ultimately be challenged or broken, I would recommend these books to you, but you know, they will definitely punch you in the feels. Next up, I listened to the audiobook for The Gender Games, The Problem with Men and Women from Someone Who Has Been Both by Juno Dawson. This is a non-fiction book about gender and about Juno Dawson's experience as a trans woman growing up in the UK. The tagline for the book is why we are all being messed up by gender and what we can do about it. And in it, Juno Dawson goes through some memories from her childhood and talks about how she first realized that she was trans and how she came out to her family a second time because she had already come out in her youth as a gay man when that was how she identified, and kind of how her journey transitioning went from there. She talks about gender as like a person almost that is there to screw over everyone, not just trans people. So she talks about strict gender expectations, particularly how they affect kids and how kids are marketed to in gendered ways. She talks about gendered toys and books and things like that. And then at the same time, she's recounting a lot of anecdotes from her life, and some of them are touching or are sad, but actually a lot of them are quite funny. And I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Juno Dawson herself, and she is hilarious. She's really good at narrating. I don't know if it's just because like it's a memoir and it's her telling the story in her own voice, and her voice is quite funny. Like, I haven't actually read any of Juno Dawson's fiction because she's a YA writer. I just haven't happened to, so I don't know if that's something that carries through her novels as well, but I thought the audiobooks was really a treat because she was reading it as well, and she did like such an amazing job. And the last thing I want to talk about in this video is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. I finally read Carry On. I'm not even sure where to start with this book because there is so much to say. Most of you probably already know that it came from fan fiction between chapters in Fangirl, also by Rainbow Rowell, but if you don't know about it, I suggest you Google it, do some research on it because it's quite interesting. And I also suspect that if you're you're watching this and you're not a Harry Potter fan, you weren't in Harry Potter fandom when the books were coming out, and you've never read Harry Draco fanfiction, you probably will have like a different view of this book than people reading it with kind of that background in mind, which is definitely the case for me. This book is about Simon Snow, the prophesized savior of the wizarding world, except he's the worst chosen one that's ever been chosen. He's not that great at magic, and his magic tends to explode out of him in really destructive ways rather than like actually being useful. It must be said, for a large portion of this book, Simon is also way more concerned with what's going on with Baz, his roommate and his arch nemesis, who's possibly a vampire and didn't come back to Watford School of Magics at the beginning of term and has just been missing. I really enjoyed this book. There were a lot of things that I liked about it. I really liked how the world of mages and the mundane world seemed to be a bit more connected. Not necessarily that anyone in the mundane world had any idea that there was magic, but that the people in the magical world were able to navigate the mundane world a little bit better and didn't live quite as separately as the wizarding world does in Harry Potter. I really enjoyed all the characters and the relationship that they had with each other. I thought the dynamic between Simon and Baz worked really well, and just the way that we got to see both of their points of view was really interesting. There were other point of view characters throughout the book, but the two of them were most prominent, and I thought that worked really well to kind of show us their relationship evolving. I absolutely loved the character of Penelope. She was really great in the way that Hermione is great, but also in different ways. I loved that Simon and Penelope didn't agree all the time. I loved that Baz and Penelope didn't agree all the time, but sometimes they found this common ground, even though they're kind of mostly wary about each other. The thing that I didn't particularly like about this book was the ending. I think there are things at the end of this book that I wish hadn't happened. I'm not saying that I would have wanted something that was completely wrapped neatly with a little bow and everybody's happy, but I thought some of the consequences were too much, and I really disliked the fact that we end this book as the reader knowing more than the characters, where the characters are in the dark, they don't know about a thing, or the characters believe something that is patently false, that we know as the reader is false, and that just kind of, to me, felt a little bit like unsatisfactory. So that's it. These were books 39 through to 43 that I've read this year. I know I still have some catching up to do in filming those wrap-ups for you, but I will definitely continue doing them. I'm looking forward to catching up before the end of the year so that we can start 2018 like on the right foot. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're planning to check any of them out. Let me know if you have recommendations for things that I should read based on the things that I talked about in this video. If you'd like to see more from me, you can check a recent video right about here. And if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button that's on my face right about here for more videos from me every week. I've been Claire. Thanks so much for watching, and see you soon. Oh, she's the fluffle. She's the fluffiest.